They pulled her over without knowing she was about to become the most powerful badge in town, and the one to change everything. A cool breeze passed through the early morning streets as Danielle Thomas drove her dark blue SUV into a quiet town she had never visited before. Her GPS gave short instructions as she followed the route toward City Hall. She was moving here, not just to live, but to lead. Today was her first day as the new chief of police. It was a role she had worked hard for, and one she was proud to accept. The town was small, mostly peaceful and unfamiliar. But Danielle wasn't nervous, she was focused. She had spent years in law enforcement, and she believed that this new chapter would be a good one. She wore a simple blouse and black slacks. Her short hair neatly brushed, and a folder containing important papers sat beside her in the passenger seat. The sun was still climbing into the sky as Danielle turned down a quiet residential road. A few people were out walking dogs, and the occasional car passed her. The town felt sleepy and calm. She slowed slightly at a stop sign, then continued down the road. Just then, flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Police car was following her closely, siren briefly chirping to get her attention. Surprised, Danielle pulled over to the side and rolled down her window. She was confused. She hadn't been speeding or done anything wrong, at least not to her knowledge. Two white male officers approached the vehicle. One tapped on her window, and she politely greeted him. "Good morning." "Officers," she said, offering a gentle smile. The taller officer leaned in slightly. "License and registration, ma'am." "Do you know why we pulled you over?" "No, sir," Danielle replied calmly. "I believe I was driving within the speed limit." "You didn't come to a full stop at the sign back there," he said. Frowning slightly, Danielle kept her hands visible and began reaching for her license and registration. She handed them over politely as the officer examined them. His partner stood on the passenger side, watching her carefully, arms crossed. "Where are you headed this early in the morning?" the first officer asked. Danielle paused for a moment. "To a meeting at City Hall," she said simply. "What kind of meeting?" the officer asked again, his tone sharper now. Danielle raised her eyebrows slightly, noticing the growing suspicion in his voice. She was dressed professionally, but not in uniform. Maybe they thought she was lying. Maybe they just didn't expect someone like her, a black woman in her 40s. In a town where people like her were rare to have business at City Hall. "It's my first day," she said. "I'm starting a new job." The officers exchanged a look. "What kind of job?" the second officer asked from the passenger side, his voice slightly skeptical. Danielle remained calm. She had dealt with this kind of doubt before. Raising her voice or changing her tone, she reached into her folder and pulled out a crisp official letter. She handed it to the officer beside her. The first officer unfolded it and began to read. His eyes widened slowly. He looked back at his partner, then at Danielle. His face changed surprise, maybe even embarrassment. The letter was clear. Danielle Thomas had been appointed as the new chief of police for this very town, starting today. There was silence for a few seconds. "Oh," the officer said finally. "Chief Thomas? I'm sorry. We didn't realize." Danielle nodded gently. "That's all right. I understand." Both officers looked extremely uncomfortable. They handed back her documents quickly, and the taller one straightened his posture, trying to appear more professional. "Welcome to town, Chief," he said, with a nervous smile. "Let us know if you need an escort to City Hall." Danielle gave a soft laugh, but there was no humor in her eyes. "I think I'll be fine." As she drove off, she couldn't help but reflect on what had just happened. She had done nothing wrong. She was following the law. And yet, because of the color of her skin, and perhaps her gender, she had been treated like a suspect instead of a professional. She had been questioned, doubted, and judged before she had even stepped into her new office. Still, she didn't let it ruin her morning. She had dealt with worse in the past. Danielle had been in law enforcement for over 20 years, working her way up through the ranks with determination, discipline, and a strong sense of justice. She had faced discrimination before, she had seen the flaws in the system, and she had chosen to be part of the change from within. This town might have its challenges, But she wasn't here to be liked. She was here to lead. As she arrived at City Hall, a few people were already gathered outside. The mayor greeted her warmly and shook her hand with enthusiasm. He had personally selected her for the position, impressed by her experience and her reputation for honesty. But even he didn't know that two of his officers had just stopped her on the way. Inside the building, as Danielle walked through the halls toward the police department, she could feel curious eyes watching her. Some staff looked surprised. Others nodded respectfully. Everyone knew one thing change had arrived. She walked into her new office, took a deep breath, and looked around. The space was clean but plain. A small nameplate sat on the desk. Chief Danielle Thomas. She picked it up, stared at it for a moment, and smiled. Her phone buzzed. Text from her sister popped up. "Good luck today. Show them what a real chief." "Looks like," Danielle replied with a simple, "Already started." Later that morning, she walked into the briefing room to meet the entire department. A group of uniformed officers sat in silence, including the two who had pulled her over. Their eyes followed her as she entered in full uniform now, badge shining, shoulders straight, presence commanding. No one said a word. She stood at the front of the room, placed a file on the podium, and looked at each face in the crowd. "I'm Chief Thomas," she began. "Some of you already met me this morning." A few chuckles rose in the back, awkward and forced. She smiled. "I know change can be uncomfortable, but we're going to work through it together. My door will always be open, and I expect yours to be too. I'm here to serve, lead, and improve this department." She paused and looked directly at the officers who had stopped her. "I believe in fairness. I believe in accountability. I believe in starting fresh." One of the officers, the younger one, Officer Reynolds, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He avoided her eyes. After the meeting, Danielle returned to her office and sat down. There was so much to do: reports to read, schedules to adjust, policies to review, but she allowed herself a moment of quiet. She wasn't angry about the traffic stop. She wasn't surprised either. This was the reality many people like her lived with every day. But it also reminded her why her new role mattered. She had to lead by example. She had to challenge what was normal and prove what was possible. Outside her window, she saw the town waking up. People walking, shops opening, life moving forward. She took another deep breath, rolled up her sleeves, and began working. First day had already shown her what she was up against, but Danielle Thomas was ready. She hadn't come this far to turn back now. She had come to change the story. Danielle Thomas walked into the police station with a calm but determined look on her face. She had been through many first days before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just a new job, it was a new beginning in a town where people didn't know her, and some didn't want her. She had already felt the tension when she was pulled over by two officers earlier that morning. That moment was still fresh in her mind, but she refused to let it shake her confidence. She knew who she was and what she had worked so hard to become. She wasn't just a black woman in uniform, she was their new chief. As she stepped into the main hallway of the precinct, conversations stopped. People turned to look at her. Some nodded politely, others looked away. A few wore expressions that were hard to read: curious, cautious, maybe even doubtful. Danielle kept walking. She had learned long ago not to let other people's stares affect her. Respect was not something she expected on day one. It was something she planned to earn. Her office was at the end of the hall. Secretary greeted her with a polite but distant smile and handed her a stack of paperwork to review. The door to her office was open. Inside, everything was clean and organized, but it felt cold, like it had been waiting for someone to bring life into it. Desk was a nameplate that read Chief Danielle Thomas. She placed her bag on the chair, took a deep breath, and sat down. For a few moments, she just sat there, letting it all sink in. Oh, this office, this title, this responsibility, it was all hers now. But she didn't have much time to settle in. Within minutes, she was called to a morning briefing with the entire department. This would be her first official introduction. The officers had gathered in the meeting room, talking quietly among themselves. When Danielle walked in, the room fell silent. She noticed some familiar faces, The two officers who had stopped her earlier were sitting in the back. They looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. She stood at the front of the room, facing rows of officers, all in uniform. Most were white men. A few women and even fewer officers of color sat scattered among the group. The faces were hard. Some looked curious, others indifferent, and a few seemed openly skeptical. Danielle knew this would be the hardest part, breaking through the invisible wall of doubt. "Good morning," she began. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear. "I'm Chief Danielle Thomas. Some of you already met me this morning, though not in this room." A few officers shifted in their seats. A nervous chuckle echoed faintly. "I know change isn't always easy," she continued. "But I didn't come here to make anyone uncomfortable. I came here to work with you, to protect and serve this community, just like all of you." Speech was short, direct, and respectful. She talked about teamwork, accountability, and building trust with the community. She didn't preach or lecture. She didn't mention race, though she knew it was the unspoken elephant in the room. She ended with a message of unity. If we work together, we can become the kind of department this town can be proud of. Ready to lead. I hope you're ready to stand beside me. The room remained quiet as she finished. A few officers clapped politely. Most just nodded. Danielle didn't expect loud applause. She was here to do a job, not win a popularity contest. After the meeting, she returned to her office, where a long list of tasks waited. She reviewed recent reports, studied the department's structure, and made notes about what needed to change. As she flipped through files, patterns started to emerge, some troubling. There were repeated complaints about certain officers using excessive force. There were stops and searches that seemed to target the same neighborhoods, mostly where people of color lived. The department had never faced a major scandal, but the data told a quiet story of imbalance and old habits. Danielle made a plan to introduce new training programs focused on de-escalation, diversity, and community engagement. But she knew she couldn't make too many changes too fast. She had to be smart, strategic, push too hard and people would resist. Move too slow and nothing would improve. It was a difficult balance, but one she had learned to manage in her past roles. Later that afternoon, she held one-on-one meetings with department leaders. One by one, they came into her office. Some were polite but formal. Few were more friendly, asking about her background and her vision. But one officer, a tall man named Captain Morris, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms as he spoke. "You'll find this town is set in its ways," he said with a half-smile. "People here don't like too much change, especially not the kind that comes from the top." Danielle met his eyes and responded calmly. "I respect tradition, but I also believe we can always be better. That's what leadership is about." Morris didn't argue, but his expression didn't soften either. When he left, Danielle wrote a note to keep an eye on him, not because he was a threat, but because he clearly held influence, and his support, or lack of it, would matter. Later in the day, she walked through the station, introducing herself to staff, shaking hands, asking questions. Some officers were guarded, others opened up, sharing frustrations or stories from the field. One younger officer, a Latina named Officer Sanchez, seemed eager to talk. "I'm glad you're here," she said quietly, when no one else was around. "We've needed someone like you for a long time, someone who actually listens." Danielle smiled, grateful for even small signs of support. "Thank you. I hope I can live up to it." That night, she stayed late at the office. The building grew quiet as most people went home. She sat at her desk, reading through community surveys, trying to understand what the town expected from its police. Some of the comments were encouraging. Others were painful to read. "They treat us like criminals just for walking down the street. I'm afraid to call the police when I need help. I want to trust them, but I don't know. If they see me as a person?" Danielle leaned back in her chair, the weight of her role pressing heavily on her shoulders. She knew she couldn't fix everything in one day, or even in 1 year. But she also knew that small steps mattered, even showing up, being visible. Being willing to listen, that was a start. The next morning, She held a short meeting with the two officers who had stopped her the day before. They arrived quietly, clearly nervous. Danielle didn't raise her voice or scold them. She simply asked, "Do you know why I brought you in today?" They hesitated. One of them said to apologize. Danielle shook her head. "Not at all. I want to talk about assumptions, about how we see people and how we treat them. I know you didn't recognize me yesterday, but how would you have treated me if I were just a regular citizen, if I didn't have a badge?" The room was silent. "Not here to punish you. I just want you to think about it. Every person we stop, every question we ask, every tone we use, it matters. It shapes how people see this uniform, and we have a responsibility to get it right." The officers nodded. One of them, Officer Reynolds, looked genuinely thoughtful. "You're right, Chief," he said. I never really thought about it like that, but I will now." Danielle nodded. "That's all I ask." As the days passed, small changes began to take root.
She introduced.
Regular check-ins with officers. She walked through neighborhoods to meet community members. She attended town meetings and listened more than she spoke. People were curious, some were doubtful, but many appreciated her efforts. Not everyone welcomed her. Officers rolled their eyes behind closed doors. Some town residents whispered that she wouldn't last long, but Danielle kept going. It's not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. She wasn't just fighting for respect. She was building something new. And this was only the beginning. The days slowly turned into weeks, and Danielle Thomas continued her journey as the new chief of police in the small town. Every day brought new challenges, but Danielle remained focused. She had made a promise to herself. She would not let anyone's doubt, resistance, or prejudice stop her from doing what was right. But even though she appeared calm and confident on the outside, the reality was far more complicated. One of the biggest challenges Danielle faced was trust. The people in the town didn't trust the police, and many officers didn't fully trust her. She could feel it in the way they looked at her, the way they spoke in carefully chosen words, the way they smiled too little or too much. Some were testing her, waiting for her to fail. Others simply didn't know how to accept a black woman in charge of a department that had been led by white men for decades. Danielle believed in understanding before action, so she spent more time listening than talking. She visited local stores, community centers, schools, and churches. She sat with old women on their porches, talked with teenagers at basketball courts, and even listened to people who were angry with the police. At first, most people were polite but guarded. Some were silent. A few refused to talk at all. But Danielle kept showing up, again and again, till some walls began to fall. One Saturday afternoon, Danielle attended a local town hall meeting. It was held in a small community center. The room was packed. Residents from every background sat on foldable chairs, many of them curious to see the new chief in person. Some came with real concerns, others just wanted to watch. A middle-aged black man named Mr. Carter stood up and raised his hand. He had a tired face and a firm voice. "Chief Thomas," he began, "my son was stopped last year 3 times in 1 month by the same officer. No reason, just walking home from school. I filed complaints. Nothing changed." The room was silent. All eyes were on Danielle. She stood slowly, meeting Mr. Carter's eyes. "I'm sorry that happened to your son," she said gently. "Child should feel unsafe just walking home. I promise to review those complaints personally." Another voice shouted from the back. A woman this time. "Why should we trust you? You're wearing the same badge as them." Danielle didn't get angry. She nodded. "That's a fair question, and I'm not asking you to trust me overnight. I'm asking for a chance to earn it." It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. A few people nodded. Some still looked doubtful, but one young boy in the front row smiled at her. Danielle noticed. Sometimes that's all it took, a small sign that hope was possible. Back at the station, Danielle knew that earning the public's trust was only half the battle. The other half was changing the way the department worked from the inside. She began reviewing old cases, rechecking use-of-force reports, and reading internal complaints. She noticed something troubling. Certain officers were involved in most of the complaints, but they had never faced consequences. The reports were either ignored or brushed aside. It was a pattern she had seen before in other cities, a system that protected the wrong people while hurting the right ones. She called a meeting with the internal affairs team. From now on, she said, every complaint will be reviewed seriously. No more shortcuts. No more cover-ups. If someone in this department breaks the rules, they will face the consequences. I don't care how long they've been here. Some officers were angry. They felt attacked. One senior officer muttered, "She's turning this place into a courtroom."
Danielle?
Heard him, but didn't respond. She knew cleaning up the department would make some people uncomfortable, but it had to be done. She couldn't ask the community to trust the police if she allowed bad behavior inside the department. A few days later, she received an anonymous letter. It was left on her desk without a name or return address. The letter was short and nasty. It said things like, "You don't belong here, and go back to where you came from." There were other hateful words, the kind meant to break someone's spirit. Danielle held the paper for a long time. It wasn't the first time she had received hate like this, but that didn't make it easier. She looked out the window, trying to calm her thoughts. Then she folded the letter, placed it in a file, and moved on. She would not let fear win. Later that week, Danielle walked into the break room, where a few officers were having coffee. The room went quiet the moment she entered. She knew they were talking about her. Instead of walking away, she grabbed a cup of coffee and sat down with them. "Morning," she said with a calm smile. One officer, a woman named Officer Bailey, gave a polite nod. "Morning, Chief." Danielle took a sip. "Y'all probably know by now, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make changes. But that doesn't mean we can't work together. We're all on the same team, whether we like it or not." There was silence for a moment. And Officer Bailey said, "You've got guts, Chief. I'll give you that." Danielle smiled. "I've got more than that. I've got a plan." Over time, a few officers started to come around. Officer Sanchez became one of her biggest supporters. So did a young black officer named Malik, who had been quiet for weeks. One day he approached her privately and said, "I've been here for 3 years. I stopped speaking up because nobody listened. But with you here, maybe things can change." Danielle thanked him. "We need voices like yours, Malik. Don't go quiet again." One of her most difficult tasks came when she had to suspend an officer for using unnecessary force during a traffic stop. The officer had been with the department for over a decade. He was well liked by many of his peers. But Danielle watched the body camera footage, and it was clear the officer had crossed the line. When the news of the suspension spread, some officers were furious. One of them slammed his locker and said loudly, "She's here to destroy careers." Danielle called a department-wide meeting the next day. "I didn't come here to destroy anyone," she said, her voice steady. "I came here to make sure we follow the law. We can't hold ourselves to the same standards we expect from the public. We don't deserve this badge. That's not punishment, that's accountability." Some officers still didn't agree, but others were starting to understand. Outside the station, Danielle continued building relationships in the community. She organized a coffee with a cop event at a local cafe, inviting residents to come and talk to officers informally. At first, people were hesitant, but slowly they started showing up, asking questions, sharing concerns, even laughing. It wasn't magic, but it was progress. At one event, a young mother approached Danielle and said, "My son used to be scared of the police, but now he says he wants to be one." Danielle smiled warmly. "Tell him we need more good ones. Maybe one day he'll sit in my chair." The woman laughed. "Maybe he'll take your chair." Danielle laughed too. Even better. But not everything was smooth. Some of the townspeople began spreading rumors that Danielle was trying to change too much. One article in the local paper criticized her methods, calling her aggressive. But there were also letters to the editor supporting her. The town was divided, but Danielle wasn't surprised. Change always made people uncomfortable. One night, as she sat alone in her office, Danielle looked at a picture on her desk. It was a photo of her late father, who had also been a police officer. He had faced his own battles with racism and injustice. During his time, she often thought of him when things got tough. "I hope you'd be proud of me," she whispered. The photo seemed to smile back at her. Danielle closed her eyes for a moment. She knew that the road ahead would be long, but she had taken the first steps. People were watching. Some were waiting for her to fail. Others were quietly hoping she would succeed. She wouldn't stop now. She had already proven that. She'd belonged. Now she would prove that she could lead. Danielle Thomas had now been the police chief for a few months. Slowly but surely, she was making changes. Some people in the department had started trusting her. Some people in the community had started believing in her, thought that she knew that the real test was still ahead. Changing how people felt was hard, but changing the deep roots of the system, that was even harder. Every day started early and ended late. Danielle would arrive at the station before the sun came up and sometimes leave long after the sun went down. Her desk was always full of files, reports, and plans. But more than paperwork, it was the stories behind those papers that kept her working hard. Each complaint, each report of a broken law, each family that had been affected by unfair policing, those were the things that pushed her to keep going. One Monday morning, Danielle received a call that something had happened over the weekend. A black teenager named Jamal had been arrested in one of the poorer neighborhoods. There was no clear reason given in the arrest report. It simply said that he had been acting suspiciously and resisting questioning. Danielle's stomach dropped. She had heard that phrase too many times before. She asked for the body camera footage, sat down to watch it immediately. The video showed two officers stopping Jamal while he was walking home from his cousin's house. Wasn't doing anything illegal. He was just wearing a hoodie and, had his hands in his pockets. One of the officers told him to stop. Jamal asked why. He didn't yell or get angry. He only asked a question. But instead of giving an answer, the officer became aggressive. Within minutes, Jamal was handcuffed and pushed into the back of a police car. Danielle watched the video twice. Her heart felt heavy. She thought about all the promises she had made to the community. If she let this go, she would become just another leader who ignored the truth. But if she acted, she would face more pushback from officers who already felt she was too strict. She made her decision. The same day, she'd called both officers into her office. She looked at them calmly and said, "I watched the body camera footage. Your actions were unacceptable. We're placing you under internal investigation. You'll be placed on desk duty until further notice." One of the officers looked shocked. The other one was angry. "Are you serious?" he asked. "We were doing our job," Danielle replied firmly. "Doing your job doesn't mean abusing your power. We are here to protect people, not scare them." The news spread quickly through the department. Some officers supported Danielle's decision. Others didn't. One officer said quietly, "She's going to turn this place upside down." Danielle heard the comment but didn't react. She didn't need to argue. Her actions spoke louder. Later that week, she visited Jamal's family. They lived in a small house on the edge of town. Jamal's mother opened the door. Her face was tired, her eyes full of worry. Danielle introduced herself and asked if she could come in. They sat in the living room. Jamal was there too, sitting quietly, looking at the floor. "I'm sorry about what happened to you," Danielle said. "It should never have happened." Jamal looked up slowly. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, in a soft voice, he said, "I thought I was going to jail forever. I didn't do anything wrong." Danielle nodded. "I know. We're looking into it. The officers involved have been taken off patrol duty. We're going to make sure this is handled properly." Malel's mother wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're the first one to ever come to our house and say that." "Thank you." Danielle left the house with a heavy heart, but also a stronger sense of purpose. These were the people she was fighting for, the quiet families, the scared teenagers, the mothers who prayed that their children would make it home safe. But things at the station were becoming more tense. A few officers had started meeting after hours, complaining about Danielle's leadership. They said she was dividing the department, that she was focusing too much on race, that she didn't understand how things worked in their town. One day, she found a note slipped under her office door. It read, "You're not one of us. You never will be." She sat at her desk, holding the note in her hands. She wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. She had known this job would be difficult. She had expected resistance, but the constant whispers, the quiet disrespect, the invisible walls, they were exhausting. That evening, she called a department-wide meeting. When everyone was seated, she stood at the front of the room. Her face was calm but serious. "I know some of you are unhappy," she began. "I know you talk about me behind closed doors. I know some of you think I don't belong here." The room was silent. No one moved. "I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to make things better. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's fine. But let me be clear, I will not lower my standards. I will not ignore injustice. I will not apologize for doing what's right." She looked around the room. Some officers looked down. Others stared at her with surprise. A few nodded slowly, showing their respect without saying a word. After the meeting, Officer Sanchez came up to her. "That took guts, Chief," she said. "I've never seen a leader talk like that." "I'm with you," Danielle smiled. "Thank you. That means a lot." One of the biggest challenges came a week later. A protest had been planned outside the station. Some community members wanted justice for Jamal and other young people who had been unfairly treated by the police. The protest was peaceful, but there was worry that things could get out of control. Danielle spoke to her team before the protest began. "This is not a war," she said. "These are our neighbors. Our job is to protect them, not silence them. No riot gear, no tear gas. Just respect." Some officers didn't agree, but they followed her orders. The protest began in the morning. People held signs, chanted, and marched. Danielle stepped outside and stood with the officers. Then, to everyone's surprise, she walked into the crowd. People parted as she moved through them. Some stared, some clapped, some shouted questions. Danielle stopped in front of a group holding a banner that read, "Justice for Jamal." She raised her voice. "I hear you, I see you, and I promise this department will do better." The crowd went quiet for a moment. Then someone shouted, "Thank you." Danielle stayed for the whole protest. She shook hands, listened to stories, and answered questions. By the time the protest ended, people had seen something they had never seen before, a police chief who wasn't hiding behind a wall of silence. That night, Elko News ran the story. "A new kind of chief," the headline read. Photos showed Danielle standing among the people, listening and learning. But while the public began to warm up to her, some inside the department grew colder. Danielle knew she couldn't please everyone. She wasn't trying to. She was trying to do what was right. One night, as she was locking up her office, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Officer Malik. "Chief," he said, "I've been meaning to say, I think you're doing something brave. I want to help." Danielle smiled. "Then help me build something better." From the inside, he nodded. "I'm in." Danielle drove home that night tired but proud. She had faced anger, hate, fear, and resistance, but she had also found courage, kindness, and hope. Change was slow. It was messy. But it was happening. She looked up at the stars and whispered to herself, "I didn't come this far to give up now." She wasn't just the chief anymore. She was a symbol of change, a voice for the unheard. And most of all, she was proof that no matter where you come from, you can stand tall, speak truth, and lead with heart. Danielle Thomas's journey as the new police chief had been filled with challenges, doubts, and moments of deep reflection. She had worked hard to prove herself both inside the police department and in the community. Slowly, trust was being rebuilt, but she knew the real test was yet to come, proving that lasting change was possible. That the police department could become a force for good, not fear. Months had passed since Danielle took the job. The town was watching closely, waiting to see what her leadership would bring. The officers who had doubted her still grumbled quietly, but some had started to follow her lead. The community was beginning to believe that maybe things could be different. But Danielle understood that being a leader wasn't just about power or rules. It was about heart and courage. One morning, Danielle received news about a major case that shook the entire town. The beloved community center had been vandalized. Overnight, the windows were broken, walls covered with hateful graffiti, and valuable equipment stolen. This center was important. It was a safe place for kids. It's a spot for after-school programs and a hub for community gatherings. The damage? It was not just physical. It was a hit to the spirit of the town. Danielle immediately knew this was more than just a crime. It was a message. Someone wanted to spread fear and division. She called her top investigators to form a special team. They would work quickly to find who was behind this. She also wanted the community to know the police cared. Danielle went to the center herself. As she stepped inside, the smell of broken glass and paint hit her. Children's drawings were ripped, chairs overturned, and the atmosphere was heavy. But she saw something else. Community leaders and volunteers standing together, ready to rebuild. She spoke to them with a strong voice. "We will find those responsible. This town will not be divided by hate." The days that followed were intense. The investigation team worked around the clock. Danielle made sure officers patrolled the neighborhood more often, not just to find the vandals, but to show the community they were present and protective. She encouraged officers to walk the streets, talk to residents, and rebuild trust one conversation at a time. While the team was busy, Danielle also met with local leaders, pastors, teachers, business owners, and parents. They shared their worries, their hopes, and their ideas. Danielle listened carefully. Together, they planned community events to heal and unite people after the attack. There were neighborhood cleanups, youth basketball tournaments, and town hall discussions about safety and respect. One afternoon, as she was leaving a meeting, Danielle was stopped by a young girl holding a small flower bouquet. The girl looked nervous but smiled shyly. "Thank you, Chief," she said softly. "You're helping us feel safe again." Danielle's heart warmed. "Keep being brave," she told the girl. "We're all in this together." Meanwhile, the investigation took a surprising turn. The police discovered that the vandals were not from outside the town, as some had feared. Instead, they were local teenagers, angry and confused, caught in a cycle of frustration and misunderstanding. They had acted out of hurt and a desire to be heard. Danielle faced a difficult choice. She could push for harsh punishments, or she could try to understand why these young people had done what they did. She believed in justice, but she also believed in second chances. She met with the teens, their parents, and community leaders. The conversations were raw and honest. The teens talked about feeling invisible, about their struggles at home and school, and about wanting respect but not knowing how to ask for it. Danielle didn't judge. She listened. After these meetings, Danielle proposed a new program to the town council, one that focused on mentoring, education, and community service for young people at risk. The idea was to give them guidance and opportunities instead of punishment alone. It was a bold move, and not everyone agreed. Some said it was too soft. Others worried it would not be effective. Danielle stood firm. "We must address the root causes," she told the council. "We need to build trust and offer hope." The program was approved. Soon, community volunteers and police officers worked side by side to mentor teens. They'd organize workshops, tutoring sessions, and activities that taught leadership and responsibility. Over time, the town began to see changes. Fewer young people were getting into trouble, or families were coming forward to ask for help. The police department was no longer seen only as a force of authority, but as a partner in building a better future. Danielle's work didn't stop there. She focused on improving the department itself. She organized training sessions about bias, communication, and mental health for all officers. She encouraged her team to treat everyone with respect, no matter who they were. One of the biggest moments came during a community festival. Danielle helped organize a Unity Day event where people from different backgrounds came together to celebrate their town. There were music, food, games, and speeches. Danielle gave a speech that touched many hearts. She spoke about hope, resilience, and the power of working together. People applauded, some with tears in their eyes. That day felt like a new beginning, despite all the progress. Danielle knew the journey was ongoing. She still faced challengers' resistance from some officers, criticism from some community members, and the heavy weight of responsibility. But she felt stronger, surrounded by people who believed in change. One evening, As she walked through the quiet streets, Danielle thought about how far she had come. From the day she was stopped by officers who didn't know she was the new chief, to standing tall in front of the community, leading with heart and courage, she smiled to herself. This was more than a job. It was a mission to make sure that every person, no matter their color or background, could feel safe, heard, respected. Danielle knew that change was not easy or fast, but it was possible. And as long as she could breathe, she would keep fighting for justice and hope. Her story was not just about her. It was about a town learning to heal. It's about people learning to trust. It's about a community coming together to build a better tomorrow. And that was a story worth telling.